Out in the middle of the ocean, there's no police station, no hospital, and nowhere to run. Cruise ships promise luxury and safety, but behind closed doors, they're floating worlds filled with secrets. People vanish without a trace, rooms are sealed without explanation, and crew members whisper about morgues hidden below deck. Tonight, we're diving into the darkest true cruise ship horror stories, accounts that the cruise industry doesn't want you to hear. If you think you're safe at sea, this will change your mind forever. Before we begin, make sure you're subscribed to Dark Phantom Rides, where we explore the world's most disturbing real-life horrors every single week. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story, and let's set sail into the unknown. Let's move to our first story. I boarded the cruise with my sister Claire on a sunny afternoon in July. It was our first trip alone together, something we'd been saving up for months. We checked into our cabin number 312, a small but comfortable room on the third deck. Claire was so excited, darting around the cabin, unpacking her things, laughing about how the beds were barely wider than coffins. I laughed with her then, but now that memory makes my stomach twist. On the second day of the trip, everything changed. We had breakfast together at the buffet and then split up for a few hours. Claire wanted to explore the upper decks while I stayed behind at the pool. We agreed to meet back in our cabin by late afternoon, but when I returned, she wasn't there. At first, I thought she was just running late. Hours passed. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I combed through every deck, every lounge, even the ship's tiny library, calling her name. Nothing. Panic started to set in. I went straight to guest services and explained everything, but the staff's reaction was cold. They told me Claire must have left the ship during a stop or was simply socializing with other passengers. I insisted she would never do that without telling me, but they brushed me off, saying, "Adults sometimes need space." By the second night, I demanded they review the security footage. I stood there trembling as an officer clicked through hours of grainy CCTV. I finally saw her clear as day walking into our cabin, alone around 3:15 p.m. the previous afternoon. But that was the last time anyone saw her. There was no footage of her leaving the room, no images of her walking down the hall, nothing. She had simply vanished. When I asked to check the room myself, they denied me access. The door to cabin 312 was suddenly sealed with a digital lock only staff could open. That was when I knew something was horribly wrong. I demanded answers, screamed at them, begged them, but they wouldn't let me back inside. A member of the cleaning crew slipped me a whisper when no one else was listening. "I wouldn't go back in there if I were you," he said, his voice shaking. "That room, it's been sealed before. People go in, but they don't always come out." The third night was the worst. I barely slept, terrified that whatever had taken Claire would come for me next. I went back to guest services one last time, hoping for any scrap of information. That's when they told me something that nearly broke me. According to their records, Claire had never boarded the ship at all. I showed them our tickets, our photos together on the deck, our breakfast receipt from the second morning. They wouldn't even look. One staff member, a woman with sharp, expressionless eyes, simply said, "Ma'am, Your reservation was booked for one person only. Perhaps. You're confused. Confused? I could still smell Claire's perfume on my clothes. Her suitcase was in our cabin when I first returned, her favorite hoodie folded neatly on her bed. None of it made sense. The next morning, the ship docked at its final port. Security escorted me off the vessel without explanation. I begged them to check cabin 312 one last time, but they ignored me, dragging me down the gangway like I was a problem they couldn't wait to get rid of. I went straight to the Port Authority to report Claire missing, but when they contacted the cruise line, they were told no one matching her description had ever been aboard. They showed me the passenger manifest. My name was there, but hers wasn't. It was as if she'd never existed. I tried to contact other passengers from the cruise, hoping someone remembered seeing her, but every single one claimed they hadn't. Some even insisted they only ever saw me alone. One man who sat next to us at breakfast swore I'd been by myself the entire time. Weeks later, I managed to track down a former crew member who once worked on the same ship. He wouldn't meet in person, but he spoke to me over the phone. His voice was low, trembling. That room, 312. Don't ever go near it again. Passengers have disappeared from it before. It's why they keep changing the room numbers. The ship doesn't want anyone to notice. I asked him what was inside the room, desperate for any explanation. There was a long pause. Then he said, "There's something in the walls." That's all I can tell you. It doesn't matter how many people vanish, there's no proof. The ship cleans it up, resets the room, and it's like they never existed. I don't know what happened to Claire. I still wake up some nights expecting to hear her voice, but I can't escape the feeling that she's still out there, trapped. Inside that ship, behind the sealed door of cabin 312. And the worst part? That ship is still sailing. Let's move to our second story. I worked as a crew member on luxury cruise liners for nearly 8 years, and in all that time, there's one secret the company never wanted passengers to know. Every ship has a morgue. We never talk about it openly, but it's there, buried deep below deck. It's not uncommon for passengers to pass away on long voyages, and the morgue is where they're kept until the ship returns to port. Most crew members avoid that part of the ship entirely. But I wasn't so lucky. On my second year at sea, I was assigned night shifts in the lower decks, performing basic maintenance and safety checks. That meant I had to walk past the morgue almost every night. It was just a steel door with no windows, bolted shut with a heavy latch, and a discreet sign marked "Authorized Personnel Only." I hated passing it. The air felt colder down there, heavier somehow, like it clung to my skin. One night, as I was walking my route, I heard something unusual. At first it was faint, almost like the hum of the ship's engine. But then I realized it was voices. Soft, overlapping whispers coming from behind the morgue door. My blood ran cold. We had 4 bodies stored inside at the time, a natural cause death, an accident, and 2 elderly passengers who hadn't made it through the voyage. None of them were supposed to be making a sound. I pressed my ear to the door, my hands trembling. The voices were clearer now, a jumble of words I couldn't quite make out, like multiple people speaking all at once. Then I heard my name. Clear as day, I stumbled back in shock, my heart hammering. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I was just overtired, but the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, almost frantic, as though they knew I was about to leave. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my curiosity kept me frozen in place. I knocked lightly on the door. I don't know why. Maybe part of me hoped someone from security was inside. But what answered wasn't a knock. It was a deep guttural, scraping sound from within, like fingernails clawing against metal. Then silence. I sprinted out of there and didn't stop until I reached the upper decks. My supervisor laughed when I told him what I'd heard. "Don't worry about it," he said. "Those lower decks mess with your head. It's the echo of the engines, happens to everyone." But it didn't feel like an echo. The next night, I was ordered back on duty. I avoided the morgue for as long as I could, but eventually I had to walk past it. This time, the door was slightly ajar. That should have been impossible. The latch was always locked. I hesitated, debating whether to report it, when I heard it again, the whispers. Louder now, clearer. I stepped closer and pushed the door open a few inches. Cold air rushed out, colder than any freezer. It burned my lungs. Inside, the small, sterile room was filled with metal drawers along the walls, each one sealed. But the whispers were louder here, swirling around me like a wind I couldn't feel. I was about to back out when I heard the scrape again, this time from one of the drawers. Slowly, the front panel began to rattle, as though someone inside was trying to force it open. My knees locked in place. Then came the voice. Not a whisper, not a scream, but a low, croaking moan. "Let us out." I slammed the door and ran so fast I nearly tripped over the stairs. When I reached the safety of the main decks, I reported the open door to my supervisor. He didn't even ask questions. He just nodded, jotted something down in his notebook, and told me to forget about it. The next day, I overheard two senior officers talking quietly near the crew mess hall. One of them mentioned that there had been an incident in the morgue and that they had to reassign the drawers. I wanted to ask what that meant, but the look they gave me shut me up instantly. After that, I refused to work the lower decks at night. I swapped shifts, took extra duties, anything to avoid going near that part of the ship. But even on the upper decks, I sometimes felt the weight of eyes on me, like someone or something was watching from below. Months later, I transferred to a different vessel, hoping the change would bring me peace. But it didn't. Every ship has a morgue. Every ship has stories the company buries along with the dead. And I'll never forget the sound of those voices calling my name from behind that steel door, begging to be released. When you step on a cruise ship, you think of the pools, the buffets, the open ocean views. You don't think about the hidden doorways below deck or the bodies locked away in drawers just a few levels beneath your feet, but they're there, and some nights they're not as quiet as they should be. Let's move to our third story. It was the 5th night of a week-long cruise when the ocean went completely silent. No waves crashing, no wind, just the hum of the ship's engines reverberating through the decks. I was leaning against the railing on the upper deck, staring into the pitch-black water, when I noticed something strange. There was a ripple, a faint disturbance in the ocean, just a few meters beyond the ship's lights. At first, I thought it was a whale or a school. Oh, a fish. But then I saw it again, and it was bigger than anything I'd ever seen before. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Another passenger, a man named Jordan, walked over with his phone out, trying to record it. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the engines. I shook my head. Whatever it was moving fast, matching the ship's pace exactly. Every few seconds, I could see a faint, massive shape surfacing just under the water, dark, sinuous, and impossibly long. We called over a few more people, and soon a small group of us were leaning over the railing, phones held out, recording. The water. The shape darted closer, close enough that I could see the faint glimmer of what looked like scales reflecting the deck lights. Then it vanished beneath the ship, and the water went still again. Jordan played back his video immediately, eager to prove what we'd seen. But his phone screen was blank. The video had recorded nothing but black water. He swore he had pressed record. He tried again, pointing his camera straight into the water. Nothing appeared on screen. Another passenger tried with their phone, and the same thing happened. No matter what angle or setting we used, the water showed up as an empty void. That's when we saw it again. This time, the shape broke the surface for a split second, and I swear I saw an eye large, unblinking, glowing faintly like a dying lantern. Someone screamed. We all stepped back from the railing at once. The next morning, the ship's captain made an announcement over the intercom about unusual ocean conditions. He told everyone to stay inside and avoid the outer decks for the rest of the day. That was strange enough, but what unsettled me even more was that the crew started quietly patrolling the hallways, watching everyone like hawks. It felt as though they knew something was out there, and they were trying to keep us from finding out more. Jordan and I decided to sneak back to the deck late that night. We waited until the crew changed shifts and slipped past the stairwell door onto the outer deck. The air was thick with mist. I gripped the railing and stared out at the black water again, but this time I didn't have to wait long. Something enormous rose from the water. It didn't make a sound, not even a splash, but the ocean around it seemed to recede, as though it were pulling the sea into itself. It was only visible for a second, but I'll never forget it, the massive, scaled body that stretched as far as I could see, the jagged ridges on its back, and the single glowing eye fixed directly on us. Jordan dropped his phone. It clattered against the deck, screen shattering, and in that split second, I thought the thing was going to breach the surface completely. But instead, it slipped silently back under the waves. We grabbed the phone and ran back inside, our hearts pounding. We told a crew member what we'd seen, but he didn't even react. He just shook his head and muttered, "Stay away from the decks. It's safer that way." The next day, we tried to find the other passengers who had been on the deck with us that first night, but none of them were anywhere on the ship. When we asked about them at guest services, the staff claimed they'd disembarked early at one of the ports. But we knew that wasn't true. They had been planning to stay until the end of the cruise, just like us. On the final night of the trip, the intercom crackled to life again. This time the captain's voice was softer, almost resigned. "We ask all passengers to remain in their cabins tonight. For your safety." I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard a low, droning noise vibrating through the walls of my cabin. It wasn't the engine, and it wasn't the ocean. It was a sound so deep and unnatural it felt like it was crawling inside my skull. I pressed my ear to the wall and froze when I realized the sound was coming from directly outside. The cabin's porthole window was fogged up, but I wiped it clean and peered into the darkness. At first, all I saw was black water. Then, slowly, something massive floated up from below. The glowing eye was back closer this time, so close it filled the entire window. It didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me through the glass as though it knew I was there. I stumbled backward and hid in the bathroom until dawn. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the eye was gone, and the water was calm. The cruise ended the next morning. As we disembarked, I overheard a crew member talking in hushed tones to one of the officers. He said, "We were lucky this time. It only took 3. I don't know what they meant by that. But I do know this, whatever we saw wasn't a whale, or a shark, or anything we can explain. It followed the ship for days, and I can't shake the feeling that it was waiting, watching, choosing. And if you ever find yourself standing on the deck of a cruise ship at night, staring into the endless black water, you might just realize it's staring back." Let's move to our 4th story. They called it an upgrade. My husband Daniel and I had booked a standard cabin for our honeymoon cruise, but when we arrived at the terminal, the receptionist smiled and said we'd been moved to a premium suite at no extra charge. We thought it was our lucky day. The new cabin was bigger, with a balcony overlooking the ocean, a king-sized bed, and even a small sitting area. The room number was 666. We laughed about it at first, joking that it was a bad omen. "As long as the bed's comfortable," Daniel said, dropping our luggage by the door. But the joke stopped being funny after the first night. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I woke to the sound of scratching. It was faint, like nails dragging along wood, coming from inside the walls behind the headboard. Daniel was asleep, so I nudged him awake. He groaned, listened for a moment, then shrugged it off. "Old ship," he mumbled. "It's probably rats." The next night, it happened again. Same time, same scratching. Only this time, it was louder, more frantic, as though something was clawing its way through the walls. I got up and pressed my ear against the paneling. The sound stopped immediately. I pulled back, heart hammering. Then the scratching resumed right behind where my head had been. We complained to guest services the next morning. The woman behind the counter smiled politely and said she'd have maintenance check the room, but when we returned that evening, nothing had changed. Daniel suggested we sleep with the lights on, but at 3:33 a.m., the scratching returned, louder than ever. This time, Daniel pounded on the wall and shouted, "Cut it out!" The scratching stopped, replaced by silence so complete it made my ears ring. We both held our breath, staring at the wall. That's when we heard it. 3 soft knocks from the other side. I grabbed Daniel's arm. "Someone's in there," I whispered. He shook his head, looking pale. "There's no room behind that wall. It's just the outer hull." We barely slept. The next morning, we demanded to be moved to a different cabin. The receptionist looked at our room number and frowned. "We're fully booked," she said, not even checking the computer. "I'm afraid we can't move you." That night, we decided to record the sounds. Daniel set his phone on the nightstand, with the camera facing the wall. We left the lights on and waited. At 3:33 a.m., the scratching started again, louder than ever. I gripped Daniel's hand, too afraid to move. Then the wall bulged. Just slightly, like something was pressing against it from the other side. We both froze, staring as a faint handprint appeared on the wallpaper, pressing outward. I screamed. Daniel lunged forward and ripped the phone off the nightstand, stopping the recording, but when we looked back, the handprint was gone. The next morning, we checked the footage. There was nothing. No scratching, no handprint, just the two of us lying awake in bed, staring at the wall like lunatics. We didn't know what to do. We considered asking the crew for help again, but we were terrified they'd think we were crazy. We decided to stick it out for the last 2 nights, but we never slept. We just lay there, watching the walls, waiting for 3:33 a.m. on the final night. The scratching was so loud it drowned out the ship's engines. Daniel jumped out of bed and grabbed the small desk lamp, ready to smash through the wall if he had. Keys. But before he could take a swing, the scratching stopped, the room went silent, and then something spoke. It was a voice so soft we almost missed it, a whisper sliding out from the walls. It said just 3 words, "Don't go home." Daniel dropped the lamp. I burst into tears. We grabbed our things and fled the room, spending the rest of the night huddled in the lobby until the ship docked. When we disembarked, we begged guest services for an explanation. The woman behind the counter gave us a tight smile and said, "We'll be sure to close that cabin for inspection." 2 months later, I called the cruise line to ask about room 666. The agent on the phone told me there was no such cabin. "Our numbering system skips 666 for superstitious reasons," she said. I hung up immediately. Daniel and I don't talk about it anymore, but I can still hear the scratching sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet. And I keep wondering, what would have happened if we'd stayed in that room one more night? Whatever it was inside those walls, it didn't want us to leave. Let's move to our 5th story. It was the summer of 2018 when I booked a solo cruise through the Caribbean. I'd been through a rough breakup and wanted some time alone, a chance to disconnect from everything. The first few days were everything. I hoped for sunny weather, endless buffets, and quiet evenings on the deck with a book. But on the 4th night, something happened that I still can't explain. I was walking back to my cabin after dinner when I noticed a man standing near the railing. He was staring out at the ocean, motionless, with his back to me. I might not have thought much of it, but there was something off about him. He was wearing a faded suit, completely out of place for a casual cruise. His hands hung stiffly at his sides, and he didn't move an inch, even when the ship rocked with the waves. You okay, man?" I asked. He didn't respond. He didn't even turn his head. I stood there for another few seconds before shaking it off and heading to my room. But as I reached the corner of the hallway, I glanced back. He was gone. The next night, I saw him again in the same spot. This time I was sure of it. He hadn't moved an inch. I started walking toward him, calling out louder, but as soon as I took my 3rd step, the ship's lights flickered. "When?" They came back on. The man was gone, as if he had never been there. I started asking around about him the next morning. A bartender told me I wasn't the first to see the man at the rail. According to the crew, passengers had been spotting him for years. "He doesn't bother anyone," she said, shrugging. "But if you see him 3 nights in a row, you're in trouble." I laughed nervously. "What happens if you see him 3 nights?" She didn't answer. She just walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words over and over in my head. Around midnight, I decided to take a walk on the deck to clear my mind. And that's when I saw him again. He was closer this time, no more than 20 feet away. His back was still turned to me, but I could see the outline of his face reflected faintly in the glass of the railing. His expression was blank, lifeless. My chest tightened. I took a slow step forward. The man's head snapped around so fast I barely saw it move. His eyes locked onto mine, and I froze. They weren't normal eyes. They were sunken, empty, like looking into 2 pits of black water. He raised one hand, pointing directly at me. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. But then he smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, twisted and wrong. He mouthed something I couldn't hear. I bolted for my cabin, slamming the door behind me. The next morning, I went straight to guest services and begged them to let me disembark at the next port. The clerk looked at me strangely and said the ship had no scheduled stops for another 3 days. I spent the rest of that day locked in my cabin, curtains drawn, lights on. When night came, I tried to stay awake, but sometime after 3 a.m., I must have dozed off. I woke to the sound of someone knocking softly on my door. My heart pounded as I crept toward the peephole. There was no one in the hallway. But when I turned away, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The man in the suit was standing in the corner of my cabin. I screamed and grabbed the phone to call the front desk. But when I turned back around, he was gone. The cabin was empty. I didn't sleep again after that. I just sat on the bed, watching the door, waiting for morning. When the ship finally docked 3 days later, I was the first person off. I went straight to the port security office and asked about the man in the suit. The officer frowned and said I wasn't the first passenger to ask. "People see him on almost every voyage," he said. "We think he's the spirit of a man who jumped overboard years ago. Some say he's still looking for someone to join him." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. He just gestured toward the ship. When I looked back, I could see the man in the suit standing on the upper deck, motionless, staring straight at me. I don't know why he chose me, or what would have happened if I'd stayed on that ship any longer. But one thing is certain, I'll never set foot on a cruise ship again. And if you ever see a man in a faded suit staring out at the ocean, whatever you do, don't look him in the eyes.